your first, and we're so delighted to have you and so proud of you. All these books, that's like super exciting. Tell us a little bit, I wanted to start off asking you about your journey to becoming a published author. You've had so many twists and turns in your really interesting professional life.
Sure. So as you said in the intro, I started off as a lawyer. I was one of those people who went to law school because I liked to write. And I think, I did have an interest in journalism, but I was too risk averse to be sent to some little paper in Little Rock, Arkansas or something. Like I wanted a very clear path, career path. And so I went right from college to law school, not realizing that there's nothing creative about the writing that you do as a lawyer. And I was just wildly ill-suited for the profession, particularly at a big firm. And so I, at night and on the weekends while I was a lawyer, I would take writing classes. And I was not doing well as a lawyer, but everything that I sent out got published. And it was literally the days before the internet where I would literally print it out on my dot matrix, printer and literally send it in the mail to an editor at a newspaper or whatever, and everything got published. And so I kind of was like, the universe is talking to me. I need to do something different. And so that's when I went back to school and got a master's in journalism. And I went to work at a paper that's a legal affairs newspaper. And I loved it, and I loved being a journalist. And after I started having babies, I was a freelance journalist for 20 plus years. But at the same time, I always really wanted to be a fiction writer. So in my 30s, well, I have some books that I wrote years ago, like in my 20s, that are just put away. No one will ever see them. But started getting serious about it in my 30s, and just decided to go for it. Sort of like, if I don't do it now, when will I do it? And in the last 3 to 4 years, I've just kind of I got to a point in my career, my legal journalism career, where I felt like I'd written every story there was to write. And I just decided that I was going to shift the balance from doing primarily legal journalism and a little bit of novel writing on the side to mostly novel writing and a little bit of legal journalism on the side. So that's sort of the history of my varied writing career.
What does it feel like to be a published author?
Well, it's funny when I was first a journalist, it was such a thrill to see, your name above the fold or whatever. And I just got to the point where, that wasn't that exciting anymore. I was just like, just send me the check. I don't care whose name is on it. But it's fun. I mean, it's fun to go into a bookstore and see, PEEPS. I did not go the traditional publishing route. I tried. We can talk about that because the publishing industry, and I'm sure some of the other authors here who are going to be doing the Salon can talk about the industry and how wildly difficult it is to break into. So it's a lot of work to be a published author in the sense of, having to sort of hawk your wares and try to get people to read your book. But it is a thrill when you see a review from somebody you don't know on Goodreads that, loved the book or whatever. So it's fun. It's a lot of fun. And I have a lot of stories that I want to tell. And, I just feel lucky that I started doing this at a time when self-publishing was changing a lot, and it just became a lot more accessible to people who wanted to write books.
Tell us a little bit about the self-publishing process. How does it work and what's involved?
Yeah, so, well, I'll tell you sort of why I went that way. I mean, with every single book, I got very close to getting an agent and going the traditional publishing route. And you cannot get a traditional publishing deal without an agent. And I would get a lot of requests after my query letters for, the manuscript, and I got a lot of, I love this, but I can't sell it. And so that was very frustrating because I feel like agents are always chasing what is popular right now, and even if they love what you're writing and they don't feel like they can slot it into this this vision, like if it's not the next 50 Shades of Grey or Hunger Games or whatever they're looking for, no matter how much they like it, they won't represent you because they only get paid if they sell your book. So I found that very, very frustrating. And with PEEPS in particular, I got very close to an agent. And so anyway, with all 4 of my books, I just got to the point where enough people had told me that it was good that I was just going to bypass the traditional publishing realm and just publish it on my own. And it's gotten a lot easier in probably the last 15 years with Kindle, where you can literally just upload a manuscript. You can create your own cover. I have a cover designer and I have a formatter. But so you basically, the benefits of self-publishing are you can publish it within days of finishing. I mean, if I were to get an agent and go a traditional publishing route, probably from the day the agent took me on, it would be 2 years at least before the book was in a bookstore, because there are all the channels that they go through. And independent publishing, you can just get it right as soon as you have a cover and a manuscript. You can get it right up. So that's a huge advantage, and the royalties are better as well because it's basically you have to give a little bit to Amazon or whatever platform you're putting it on, but otherwise you don't have to pay an agent, and so it has a lot of advantages. And I think it's a great way to go if people have the sort of industriousness to do it, and they have a story to tell and they want to get it out there.
Let's talk a little bit about the stories that you're telling. I know there's one person in this room who inspired one of your books.
Yes. My dear friend Lita.
In the front row. How do you come up with your topics? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and have this idea? Do you keep a notepad by the bed? I do that. Yeah. But I don't sleep usually in between my note writing. But where do these come from, these ideas?
All over. So my first book, Cheer, was inspired by something that I was at a football game in college, and a friend leaned over and whispered something to me about one of the cheerleaders that we were watching that she had gone to high school with. And she whispered something to me, and I was like, oh, that would make a great novel. And that was, I was maybe 19 at the time, and I wrote that novel like when I was like 32, 34, because I just couldn't get it out of my head, and I knew it was a great story. In the case with Lita also was telling me a story about a friend of hers, and I thought about it after, and I was like, what if it had gone the other way? And so it was a little bit of a what if situation. That inspires a lot as well. So those two were inspired by things that kind of a little light bulb went off. Beshert, which was my third book, that was actually, this might interest you, was really sparked by kind of a crisis of faith and like, what does it mean to be Jewish? That's a novel that's set in Israel, and I was really struggling with, I got my Ancestry.com, thing back, and it said I was 100% Eastern European Jewish. Like, nothing at all exciting or, like surprising. I mean, like literally not 99%, but 100%. But I was like, so I know I'm Jewish in my bones, but like, what does that mean? And like, I'm an atheist. And so like, what does that mean? And our family had taken a trip to Israel, and I was looking at some of the Hasidic men and women and just thinking, well, they're Jewish and I'm Jewish, but I'm nothing like them. And so anyway, that book was sparked by that, something that I was personally exploring, and writing it enabled me to spend extra time in Israel in my mind, which was a bonus. And then PEEPS was sparked a lot by, what my friends and I were talking about a lot at dinners, which is, we're in our early 50s and, we're kind of at the tail end of the grunt work of raising kids, and and our careers are sort of peaking, I guess. And so but we still have a lot of life left in us. So are we going to keep going, or do we do something totally different? And, we're all still very vibrant, but our lives are changing. And so it's sort of a midlife exploration. And so that's sort of a little overview of all four. But I guess the answer, the long answer, is that they come from all sorts of places. I read a lot of, Dear Abby and obituaries, and I find a lot of things in those that can spark a story. I mean, particularly Dear Abby, because there's conflict inherent in the letter. I mean, if the person wasn't, struggling with something, they wouldn't be writing the letter. And there's a story in every Dear Abby letter. And I read a lot of obituaries where I'm like, God, I wish I knew this person. And you read a little factoid, and sometimes I tear those out and put them in a file and think, I'm going to use that in a novel someday. So it's really everywhere.
Nice. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about Peeps. When I first started reading, I had the thought that probably many readers who know you were thinking, oh, this is an autobiographical character, right? I'm gonna get into the mind of a character that is very, very, very close to your heart, because maybe it's mainly you. But as I read more, I started to think, well, maybe not, and maybe this family isn't exactly where you came from. I watched the wonderful interview that Michael Krasny did with you, and I know that he, both of you, but he affirmatively suggested that this is absolutely not autobiographical, and this is really a fictional character. So can you tell us sort of where is that line between something that's inspired by where you're at as a writer or as a person, and then where the character just took off in her own way?
Yes. So I get that question a lot because I'm basically Meg's age, and a lot of my friends will say, oh, I started reading and I heard your voice. But then Meg does something a little bit, surprising, like halfway through, and they're like, I can't believe you did that. And I'm like, I didn't do that. That was the character. So, I mean, there are some autobiographical parts. I mean, Meg has anxiety and I have anxiety, and some of her techniques that she uses to cope with it are things that I do as well. But she's a lot braver than I am, and it is really not based on me. This story came about largely because if you look at my YouTube history, you'll see that I'm obsessed with RVs and van life. I just love reading about or watching videos about people who do these fun trips, and I wanted to write a journey story, and so I thought back to some of the journey stories that I had enjoyed in the past, and I thought of The Wizard of Oz and Wild by Cheryl Strayed. Have you guys read Wild? And I was thinking, okay, I'm going to use those as kind of a model for this story, and I realized in thinking about it that they were exactly the same. It's a young woman in one case or a young girl in the other, and they both take a road. One is the Pacific Crest Trail and one is the Yellow Brick Road, and they go on a journey to basically find their place in the world. And so I just decided to write the next iteration of that book, which is a middle-aged woman who takes the interstate. Just like Dorothy and Cheryl in those books, Meg meets people along the way that help her understand herself and move further along in her journey, both literal journey and figurative journey. And then as far as the podcast element, so Meg is a podcaster, and she has this podcast where she asks the guests the same 7 questions. And that is... that was a device, first of all, for her to meet people along the way of her journey, but also it was a podcast that I really wanted to see in real life. I love podcasts, as I'm sure you guys do, and I just noticed that they were always about extraordinary people, the murderers or the, inventors or whatever. And I'm always craving a podcast about ordinary people, kind of like why I read obituaries. And so I realized, I could give this podcast idea to Meg, the character, and that was just like a perfect marrying of the two kind of ideas I had, and that's where Peeps came to life. But it is not me. I kind of lived vicariously through her, because my husband is not that adventurous about getting in a van and driving across country, and so I got to kind of do it with Meg.
Where did your RV obsession come from?
I don't know. I have always really been interested in like having everything that you need very close to you. And as my husband will attest, I'm always wanting to throw things out. Like, I don't like a lot of stuff. And Meg this is one part that's autobiographical, where she talks about the cozy feeling that she gets when she first experiences it when she goes on a friend's sailboat, and just how everything you need is right there. And I'm just sort of fascinated by that idea of just, just having your home and being able to go wherever you want with your home with you. So maybe someday I'll actually take an RV trip, but in the meantime, I wrote Peeps. So,
well, it's a very Jewish story in that way, that everything travels with you.
I never thought of that.
I mean, since you're 100%, Ashkenazi Jewish.
Yes, maybe this is generational trauma that is, which is something that Meg actually explores as well. But I never thought of that.
Well, trauma, and also kind of this nimble, ability to take what's important with you, because it's inside of you, and that material goods can be sort of replaced as needed. I actually talked to somebody earlier today who told me she just sold her house. She sold everything in it, and she has 3 suitcases worth of things from her wonderful life, and she's going to take them to Portugal. And I thought, that sounds so dreamy, being able to. Because my life, like many of us, is just filled with clutter.
Yeah.
And being able to, declutter sounds really amazing.
Yeah. Oh, I want an update on that woman.
I'll tell you about her journey. It's not in an RV, but it's really about kind of, it's one of these journey stories about going around the world, as Meg does, around the country to find herself back, like Dorothy does, and kind of on these journeys. Will you read a little bit of Peeps to us? Do you have a favorite part?
I do. I'm just going to grab my glasses. And so I think I'll read the beginning. There'll be a little bit of a break, which I will explain. That might be a good idea. Yeah, thank you. Awesome. Can you hear me? Okay. So this is chapter 1, and I'll read most of it, then we'll take a little break, and then I'll read the end, and I'll explain that. I had so many questions. Why had she never tried to understand me? Why had she been so cold to us? If the situation were reversed and the funeral was for me, would my mother have attended? Just as those thoughts arose, the service ended. The 20 or so guests began to mingle and nibble on bagels and fruit in the restaurant's small private room, my mother's ashes in a modest urn at the head of the table. I excused myself for the restroom, my brain swirling with everything I wished I'd asked before cancer claimed her lucidity. Through the bathroom's partially cracked window, the squawks of seagulls and the pot my brother was smoking wafted inside. It hit me then. I was no longer someone's daughter. At 51, I was an orphan, my father having died suddenly when I was a toddler. I sat on the closed toilet lid, my bones aching as if I'd been hit by a semi. Yet, also emerging were the first sparks of what I always imagined I'd feel when my mother was gone, relief. I washed my hands in the sink just to keep me alone with my thoughts a few moments longer. I wished I'd asked my mother the 7 questions I posed to all my podcast guests. Since she was now dead, what object, I wondered, would she have taken with her to the afterlife? I honestly had no guesses. I'd never been able to grasp what was important to my mother. I just knew it wasn't us. Alex, my son, would probably take his collection of Stevie Wonder albums on vinyl. My ex-husband Jeff recently volunteered his answer. I'd bring my wedding ring from my marriage to you, he said, and the receipt from my first date with Milt, the 2 loves of my life. Then another truth struck me as sharply as the almond-scented soap. I was no longer someone's partner. I needed to get back to the gathering, as the mourners would soon disperse. My brother was still outside smoking, so it was up to me to thank everyone who'd paid their respects. I joined the tiny cluster of my friends who'd come not to say goodbye to my mother, but to support me. One handed me a mug of coffee, another draped her arm around my shoulder. I'd known most of these women for upwards of 15 years, since our kids were in preschool. We'd seen each other through potty training and tantrums. We'd collaborated about when to allow our kids cell phones and social media access. We'd shared photos of our teens with their learner's permits. Now those kids were college freshmen scattered throughout the country. Reality smacked me again. I was no longer an active parent. Meg? I turned to see Jeff, my ex-husband, arms outstretched. Milt's gone out to get our car, he said, enveloping me in a hug. He felt, he smelled, as he always did, as familiar to me as my own body. I'll call tomorrow, okay? I nodded. Thank you both. Soon after, the rest of the guests drifted out with condolences and embraces. Then it was just me and my younger brother, Leith. I was settling up with the restaurant when Leith approached me, carrying the urn. I assume you don't want this, he said, holding it up like a trophy. That's a hard no, I said. Even if my mother had been warm and loving, the kind of mother I worked so very hard to be, I would have declined. I figured, I'll take it. He pulled keys from his pocket and jangled them. Got a long drive back up north. I'm going to hit the road. Thanks, Maggie, for, handling everything, especially these last few weeks. Our mother died swiftly after a pancreatic cancer diagnosis. I had arranged her care. It's what I do, I said with a shrug. Well, Leith said, half hugging me with the arm that wasn't holding our mother's ashes, now you're free. It was thrilling and terrifying. Without parents, a spouse, my son nearby, who was I? So then after that, she goes, spends the afternoon with a man who she's been on like a couple of dates with, and they say goodbye. And I'm picking up again where she has just said goodbye to him. I stood there on Adelaide Drive, not wanting to go home, but not knowing where to go instead. My friends would assume, like Brad had, that I was too sad to socialize, and I didn't want to intrude on Jeff and Milt. Just then, a petite woman with blonde hair that shimmered in the fading afternoon sunlight, who may or may not have been Reese Witherspoon, passed by me with an oversized orange purse slung glamorously over her shoulder. I remained still and watched her walk, her thick, shiny hair swaying with each step. I wanted to be someone with the need for such a bag, but I usually wore a fanny pack, and I was not going for an ironic or retro look. I carried with me merely the essentials: hand sanitizer, my wallet, my phone, with no need for a big orange bag. Someone who carried a big orange purse like that had a big life. I don't mean big like chartering a private jet to Cabo on a moment's notice. No, to me, a big life meant living with a distinct joie de vivre, a conspicuous engagement with life, a desire to celebrate little things which turn them into big things. A person with a bag like that had symphony tickets and dinner parties, a stack of hardcovers to read, and knowledge of skincare. If people won't have much to say about you at your funeral, as I observed that very morning, if YouTube thinks all you're interested in is secrets you never knew about the cast of Friends, then you're not leading the kind of big life I'm talking about. People with big lives I know. The woman who threw a reveal party when she received her pet mutt's DNA results, complete with huge balloons spelling the dog's name, a guessing game, and cake. And my neighbor who hosted free pop-up classes in her kitchen, teaching how to make authentic pot stickers exactly like her grandmother taught her. And the man whose Fridays with Mom Instagram account cataloged the adventures he planned, tasting Afghan food for the first time, Mom at a Beyonce concert for his 83-year-old mother. I wanted to ask Big Orange Purse Reese what she was carrying in that bag. Then I wanted to ask her about her life's pivot moment, one of my favorite PEEPS questions, but she was already out of sight. I remained still on the sidewalk, the setting sun beating onto my scalp, caught between longing for a big life and the momentum of how mine had simply unfolded. Mine certainly wasn't a bad life, but it wasn't a big one. And my longing was confusing. After all, with PEEPS, I celebrated little lives. Could I even have a big life? I shook the thought out of my head like a swimmer knocking water from her ear. Big lives, for all their allure, were scary, carrying risks like defeat or disappointment. Still, foreclosing the chance at a big life was as frightening to me as pursuing one. Finally, with no other options, I crossed the street, got into my car, and drove home.
I love that image of the bag and the big life that it inspires. And I love hearing your words read by you because I read them in my, in my head. I tried to conjure up your voice, but it's such a privilege to hear the words that you so beautifully crafted.
Thank you.
In your own voice. What do you like to read?
As a reader?
As a reader,
Oh,
because I know you're a big reader.
Huge,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
and
when
always
you
have been.
What
Yeah.
what do you read? What do you read and where do you read?
Okay, so I have so many venues that I read. So I always have an audiobook going. In fact, Karen Schwartz, a congregant, and we have had a 2-person audiobook club for 10 to 15 years. And so I always have an audiobook going.
You listen and then discuss it?
And then we talk about it or even just email about it. And it's so great. We choose the books together. It's really fun. So audio, and then I usually have a novel, and I kind of have an upstairs book and a downstairs book. So I'm usually reading 2 or 3 books at a time. And I really like most everything. I mean, literary fiction and women's fiction, book club fiction. I love historical fiction and nonfiction. I'm not a big science fiction or fantasy person, but I do read those occasionally. But I like memoir, everything. Yeah.
Favorite authors or who's really inspired you?
Favorite author is Amor Towles. Have you read him?
No.
So you guys have read. Yeah, I see a lot of so he wrote, did you ever hear about Gentlemen in Moscow or Rules of Civility? And he just had The Lincoln Highway is new. Rules of Civility is my all-time favorite book. I've read it probably 6 times, both audio and regular reading. And I love, I love Emily Giffin, who's kind of a chick lit writer. I love, chick lit. I love Jennifer Egan, San Francisco writer, originally from San Francisco. But Amor Towles is kind of my all-time favorite. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna have to check that out.
Yeah.
Tell us about your pen name.
Okay.
How did you choose it? Why are you writing under a pen name?
Yeah, so the 4 books we've been talking about so far, Cheer, Heads or Tails, Beshert, and PEEPS are all published under my name. And I was kind of talking a little bit about kind of how hard it is to break into the publishing world. And it's also very hard to make money. And I also talked about how I was shifting the balance between writing magazine stories and which is where I earned most of my income in the last 20 years, and then writing novels. And writing novels is not that lucrative unless you what they call write to market, which is writing to what is where there are insatiable readers, and that is in the romance genre. And so I thought, I'm going to give it a try. Actually, Beshert, the book that is set in Israel, is actually a romance novel. So I decided this year, my project is writing 3 contemporary romance novels set in a fictional town that is based on Lake Tahoe, which is a place I've spent a lot of time. And the reason that I am using a pen name is that after a lot of research, I learned that readers are particularly romance readers, have extremely specific expectations. You have to have certain beats that you hit in the story, including the all-important happily ever after. And if you don't meet that expectation, you're in big trouble. And so I realized that if I were writing if I was writing romance novels under my name and somebody liked it and then they went and picked up PEEPS, which is about like a middle-aged woman taking a road trip, they'd be like, what? Like, they'd be confused because that's not a romance novel. And so I just decided to write those under a pen name so that the reader expectations were very clear. And the covers are different. And so my idea is if I can make a little money with the contemporary romance novels, I'll maybe alternate, like 1 year doing a few of those and then going back and doing women's fiction. I have another idea for the book after PEEPS. And so that's kind of what I'm playing with right now, and we'll see how it goes. So the first of 3 under the pen name is out now, and the other 2 are coming out later this year.
And how did you choose the pen name?
The pen name is Jenna Starley, and I have a sample of the book up at the table there. I always loved the name Jenna, so that was kind of a given. And then I just wanted something really fun and flirty and feminine. My last name is like a man's first name, so I just wanted something that was very feminine. And so Jenna Starley, look her up. She's got some good stuff coming out. It's been actually really fun. And it's very, how do I put it? It's like doing exercises, because I'm writing those very fast. And so I'm going to put 3 of those out in 1 year, whereas normally a women's fiction novel, all these other ones take like a good year to write one, and then usually another year to try to sell it to an agent. This is just, it's like lifting weights, it's like I'm writing really fast and like honing a lot of my skills. And so I think it's been a great experience so far.
And do you think Jenna Starley will speak anywhere or will be?
It's so funny because
like?
all of so I have some social media for her, and I just have a little cartoon of my face because I just don't want to like Google her and have my own face on there, But maybe someday, I don't know. It's not that I'm embarrassed, or it's just that I don't want to. I don't know. The internet's a weird thing, and so I don't know. Maybe she will. We'll see.
Well, one of the authors later in this series also uses a pen name, a congregant, Lemony Snicket.
Oh, yes,
who,
of course. Yes.
Who may be able to give you some tips on how to live in the world,
okay.
showing only your back.
Just like I hope this is a fraction as interesting as the Frontline series, I hope I have a fraction of the success that Lemony Snicket has had. So.
Well, Lemony might be able, I don't know if Lemony will show his face, but I think, he may have some tips on how to be photographed in a mysterious way. One more question that I have, and I want to open it up to all of you. Can you give us a hint about book number 5? What line did somebody, put in your head, or what did you hear or see?
Okay. So because I'm working on the 3 romance novels, I only have some notes sketched out, but I will say it's going to be connected stories. I'll put it that way. So it'll be 4 different sections of different characters, but there's a through line that connects them. So I mentioned Jennifer Egan. I don't know if you read, from the Goon Squad. That's a great book, and she has a sequel, The Candy House, that just came out a few months ago. And she does a similar thing where one character, like a minor character, shows up in the next chapter as the main character. It's kind of something I haven't done before. So that's what I'm toying with.
With a focus on women, or not necessarily?
That I haven't figured out yet. Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll look
and
forward to
it's going to be set in the Bay Area.
Oh,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Questions? What would you like to ask? Should we have a microphone going around, do you think? Or can people sort of, oh, there we go. Great. So we can pass it around. A lot of hands went up, so you'll.
Hi.
Would you be willing to share what those 7 questions are?
Oh, yeah. Thank you for asking. And I should have said that the book is has an unusual format because there's a narrative, Meg's narrative, but interspersed are transcripts from her podcast. And it's kind of like little short stories in between the main narrative. So that's kind of fun and different, I think. So she asked the same 7 questions to every guest. So the first one is 7 billion people in this world, 7 billion stories. Tell me what it's like to be you right now. And the second question is, tell me about your background. And the next question is, if you could take any object with you to the afterlife, what would it be? The next question is, what's one thing you do every single day? The next question is, what was a pivot moment in your life? And the next question, which is one that I get a lot of questions about as the author, is who is someone that you never saw again? So it could be somebody that you just passed on the street for a moment, or somebody that you knew for a while and then no longer do. And then the final question is, what is your life motto? And one of the reasons that I had her ask the guests the same 7 questions is because I thought that what was interesting wasn't the questions, but the answers. Like, what object would you take with you to the afterlife? I mean, everybody's going to have a different answer to that question. And so they're partly literary device, to pull out interesting tidbits from these characters that she meets for her podcasts. And it was just a way to kind of make everybody unique and enable them to tell stories, very specific stories. And I worked really hard to have each of the podcast characters represent kind of the accent that they might have, given where they were located in the country, or just some of the words that they use, to just represent, like if they were from, Kansas City, they would say something different than somebody from Santa Monica or whatever. So I had a lot of fun with the podcast transcripts. So thanks for asking.
So that subconsciously may be very Jewish too. A few years ago on Yom Kippur, I talked about the story from the Talmud where there's 7 questions that each of us will be asked.
Come on.
When we, I'll have to
serious?
send you my sermon if I can dig it up. The 7 questions that were asked when we get to heaven, and when we confront God, God asks the 7 questions about our life. So
What are those 7
your
questions?
DNA. I will send you the sermon. I have to look back on the exact 7, but they're all about how you're living your life and the journey that you went on during your lifetime.
I had no idea.
So
That's
see, that DNA test was right.
Yeah, it was right.
It was
and
right.
I kind of modeled it. Did any of you guys ever watch Inside the Actor's Studio? Okay, and how he had that questionnaire at the end, and I always loved that. And again, every person had different answers to those questions, and so kind of had that in the back of my head that's similar to what I was going for. That I'm fascinated by that. Holy cow.
Well, it's a great way to explore. I mean, I also love to read obituaries, and I find the ordinary really extraordinary often. And being able to compare that between people, you have a constant.
Yeah.
So you're learning so much about people. It's kind of like, I'll tell you guys a secret about my quirky, brilliant husband who has some strange habits. But everywhere in the world he goes, he gets chocolate chip ice cream everywhere, because it's the only way to compare ice cream everywhere. So he's done he does research on ice cream, and just by being a consumer. But by asking those same questions, you can really get different answers from the characters that illuminate the differences. It's sort of an interesting way of making the ordinary quite extraordinary.
Yeah.
Great.
That's a great analogy.
What other questions, David?
takes about a year for you to write most of your regular novels, mainstream, and you're writing 3 romances in a year. So how have you changed your writing process, if you've changed it, to get that volume of work out?
That's an awesome question. And I had to think a lot about that before I embarked on this journey of writing 3 in 1 year. A couple of things. One is I mentioned that romance readers have very, very specific expectations, and that has helped a lot because whereas like this is something that is completely imagined, or all the other 4 or 3 books came from my own imagination or something that somebody said to me. The plot could be anything. However, with a romance novel, you have to have certain things because the readers are expecting them. So that helps because you have the bones, and then you put the flesh on. And so one thing I did to speed up my process is I started dictating the first draft. And that has been a game changer. So I should also say I am like an obsessive outliner. So for all the books I have written, whether it's these or the romance novels, I have like a 60-page outline, like super, super, super specific. So it'll have, what the character is going to smell in that, scene or whatever, how they're going to feel at the beginning of the scene versus how they're going to feel at the end. I mean, it's like extremely thorough, so that when I go to dictate, it's the essence is there, and I just have to kind of talk it out. And then I have a draft. The first draft is from dictation, and I was surprised at how well it worked. I wasn't sure if I would have that same creative kind of juice going because I wasn't watching the words on my screen, but it actually almost enhanced it in a way. And so then I have a first draft that is complete pretty quick, like within 30 days. So I usually it takes about a month to outline, and then it takes about a month to dictate the first draft, doing like 1 or 2 chapters a day. And then the editing is where you really dig in, and that's all on computer. But that's a great question because the process had to change to, meet the speed that I needed. Yes. Hi. What's your name? That's my sister.
I have a question. I know you've told me this before, but I'm curious. Do you have a favorite of the books that you've published? And how many books have you written in general? Because I know I've read a couple that you didn't publish.
Did not see the light of day.
Right.
Yes.
But how many do you think you've written?
I know how many I've written. Wait, what was the first question again?
Oh, that's good. That's your sister.
Favorite. Well, I think, PEEPS is definitely my most original book because of the way it's structured with the podcast transcripts. And I love that. I'm really proud of it. I think, in a way, Beshert might be my favorite. It really enabled me to dig into something that I was personally exploring. Like I mentioned, what does it mean to be Jewish? And again, I got to spend some imaginary time in Israel. So I love them all. I really do. I'm proud of all of them. Maybe Beshert. And Beshert also didn't get as much love in the marketplace because I think it was confusing to people. Because there is actually, so the main character is actually a Christian woman who falls in love with a secular Israeli man. And there is a whole genre of Christian fiction. And I think people got confused. Also, Israel is controversial and also underrepresented. And I just don't think people quite knew what this book was. Plus, it has a weird name if you're not Jewish, right? But I love that book. And so I wouldn't say it's my favorite, but I wish it got a little more love, maybe. And then I have written 3 books that have not gone anywhere. One was actually a romance novel I wrote in my 20s that was terrible. I wrote a mystery novel in my early 30s, and I actually got some agent interest in that. But it was funny because I had a draft, an agent was kind of interested, and then I had a baby. And then by the time I went back to it, all the technology that the amateur sleuth had used to solve the crime was like obsolete. And I was just too exhausted to like try to redo it. So that one went in a drawer. And then I wrote another women's fiction novel that just wasn't good. It just didn't work. But it's sort of like, I'm a big knitter, and like sometimes you knit a sweater that doesn't fit, and it's really frustrating. But it gives you skills to like do the next sweater better. So even though that was a lot of time and energy spent on a book that didn't really see the light of day, it was just a lot of good, practice and learning that helped the next book. So. Yeah.
Do you think you might revisit those? Would you ever pull them out and?
No.
They're
I mean, I've kind of thought about it.
They've been put to bed.
Yeah,
That's it.
yeah. Just in there, locked the key. Locked it and threw out the key. Yeah, yeah. It was time well spent, even though it wasn't published. So yeah.
Dress rehearsal. Right?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yes.
Lots of questions.
Yeah.
Joanne.
Hi, I'm Joanne. Under your pen name, Jenna
Starley.
Do you feel like you're a different persona and you have a different voice as a writer?
Oh, that's really a good question. No, I think it's definitely my voice. Those books, again, the first one's out. The second one I'm kind of finishing up right now. I'm about to start outlining the third. So I think I can safely lump them together. Those books are written in first person, and they are dual perspective, from one chapter from the woman's perspective and then the next chapter from the man's perspective. And I've written from the man's perspective in Beshert and also in Cheer. And I get questions sometimes of, is that hard? And the answer is no. I think it's still my voice. It's still my writing style. So yeah, I think it's still. I don't feel. It's sort of like if you were a cook, right? And you were, maybe cooking Italian one night and then an Asian dish the next night. It's sort of like that, I would say. So I'm still the cook, and I think my heart is still in it. Yeah. Good question, though.
I'm wondering, when you start out, even outlining, do your characters change as you write them? And do they kind of tell you what they want to do? I guess that's one question. I will answer that, and I think there's another one I forgot.
Okay. So there are usually two camps of writers. There are the plotters and the pantsers, meaning that you fly by the seat of your pants. Mm-hmm. And I am definitely a plotter. And as I mentioned, my outlines are super, super detailed. That said, I am not so rigid that I won't adjust as I'm writing. And in fact, the dictation tool that I've been using has kind of enabled me to things come out as I'm talking that I didn't put on the page, the outline. And I kind of realized, that would be a little good quirk for that character to have. Or, so yes, they do surprise you a little bit, or you just kind of realize, it would actually be better if they were here instead of there. And so I'd say it ends up being about 85% true to the outline, but I am open to adjustments. I also have a team of amazing editors who help me, including my daughter, who is truly, not just because she's my kid, but she is an exceptional reader. and gives me great input. And so I definitely will change things based on early feedback. But the outline does really form the crux of the book.
And the other question is, do you leave little Easter eggs in there that you have to go look, you have to remember, so as one is reading, pay attention to every little thing that's going on, it'll come back later?
Yes, that was definitely when I wrote that mystery novel way back then, that was a huge part of that. But I'm really glad you mentioned Easter eggs, because one thing I love to talk about with Peeps is I mentioned earlier that I was, inspired by The Wizard of Oz and Wild by Cheryl Strayed. And I had so much fun putting all kinds of little Easter eggs, little nods to both of those books. So for example, Meg adopts a cat to go with her on her journey, and her cat's name is Dottie, for Dorothy. And there are all kinds. I realized in researching that those two books were similar in a lot of other ways as well. Their symbols are very similar. So like water is a big, big deal in both books. Like the Wicked Witch of the West is killed by water. And in Wild, water was sort of the driving force for her journey. Like she had to get to the next water source. And so that kind of comes up a little bit because as Meg gets further into the center of the country, there's less water. Like less bodies of water for her, fewer bodies of water for her to see or be near. But she's from Santa Monica and really is used to being near the ocean. And so that kind of plays in. So yes, that is a really fun thing as a writer to put those little things in. And even in the romance novels, like I was mentioning, the reader's expectations form the bones of a romance novel, but it's the writer that gets to put all the little dressing all on it. And so, giving your character a little quirk or, a tick or, just something that they do when they're upset or certain clothes that they like to wear, that to me is like super fun. Or like in the first one of my romance novels, like The Office, the show, The Office, that comedy, that's kind of a through line. They make a lot of reference to that. And then in the second book, Pretty Woman, the movie, is kind of a theme. And some of the scenes mirror some of the scenes in Pretty Woman. And so I just think that stuff's really fun. That's where you get creative and, you hope your readers can see what you're doing. So, yeah.
I have one question about, when do you let people start to read bits and pieces of your writing? Does Craig have to wait until it's published to read it?
Yeah. So I have, I've been doing this now for many years, and I have wonderful friends who help me at different stages. So I have a couple friends that I give the first draft to, where it's like, this is going to be filled with typos, but like, just, what do you think of this story? And, they're very honest. Like I told you, I had one women's fiction novel that just got put away right away because they just said, this isn't working for me. And so I trust them when they say that they do like it because they have been honest. So then I kind of make general changes based on their, sort of overall thoughts. And then I have other friends when I'm getting a little more granular with like, is this scene working? Is this scene working? Then I make changes there. And then I have like people I go to, and then I have like copy editor type friends. So that where the story is just about done, but can you like find where there's a typo or a, missed comma or something like that. And having done this for a lot of books, I just feel very lucky that people are willing to, give me precious reading time because, we all have limited time. And I really trust the group. And I will say again, my daughter is truly the most talented editor. It might be that UHS training, but she's a really, really solid reader. And maybe it's because she knows I'll love her no matter what she tells me. But she's a very astute reader. So I feel like really solid with the group that I have. That, but I don't show anybody anything until there's a complete first draft.
And Emmy, do you like slash with a purple pen, or what's your implement of choice?
She prints out like a full manuscript for me, and I just give her like, she prints out a full manuscript for me, and then usually I'll kind of finish a chunk and give her it back, and I'll talk through the comments with her. And I think that's a big advantage because most of our other readers have to like give her a whole summary at the end or send it in an email, but I just like walk down to the dining room and I'm like, on page 281, like this is, whatever. So, and I'd say all of my good editing comes from really good writing, and it's not a lot of work for me, and she takes feedback very graciously, so it makes my job easy, and I'm really lucky.
She gives great feedback, like, for example, in writing the romance novel where there's two perspectives, she'll say, like, a man wouldn't say this, like, or, this sounds too feminine, or she gives me a lot of corrections when characters are texting, like, nobody texts like that, Mom. Yeah. So it's really, among other like more developmental feedback, she gives great comments. So yeah.
Does Asher weigh in too?
Asher has not read a single one of my books. However, I will say the character of Alex in Peeps, the one with the Stevie Wonder records, is modeled almost entirely on Asher. And that, I don't know how that, I didn't intend to do that, but as I was writing this college-age boy that she was very close to, he just came to me. So, yeah. So I really think you need to read this, mister.
At least that one.
Okay.
We can work on that.
That can be arranged, yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah.
I don't think it's on. I can hear you, but. No. I can repeat the question. That's fine. Yeah.
Okay. As a writer, I'm curious about your process from the perspective of discipline. Sometimes I have some friends who are writers, and okay, I get up. This one friend, he gets up 5 o'clock in the morning, leaves the house, goes to the restaurant around the corner for breakfast, goes back to his house in his office as if he's commuted to work. And then from 5 to 8 p.m., he's in the attic, has nothing to do with his a.m., nothing to do with his family, and that's my writing time, and then he goes on his day.
Yeah.
So just curious about what you do.
So the question is about discipline, and you may have heard the whole back row laughing because that's my family, and I'm super disciplined, and a lot of people are curious about writers' process and discipline and methods, and I think it's interesting to hear people's methods, but I kind of liken it to exercise in the sense of, like, maybe somebody goes and they go swimming every morning at 6 a.m. and that's how they get their exercise. And for somebody else, they go running at night. It's like what works for me really well, but it won't necessarily work for other writers. It is fascinating to me to hear about process and discipline. I'm crazy disciplined, and it comes, I think, largely from being a professional writer for 20 plus years. So particularly in the years when I was doing a lot of magazine writing in addition to novel writing, I would just sort of put the novel writing on the list of things to do. So it's like I have to interview this person for this magazine story, and I have to edit this one, and I have to blah, 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 and I have to work on chapter 3. Like that was, how I would do it. And I just put everything on my calendar. So I could literally tell you, like, you know, on August 23rd, which chapter I'll be working on. I just divide things up into small bites. And I'm just very disciplined about keeping to that plan. So, you know, and some people, they have no outline and they get up at 4 in the morning and they just sit down and write, and that's what works for them. For me, I just like to, you know I have to write a, 65,000 word novel. Okay, I'm gonna write 1,000 words on this day and 1,000 words on this day. And that's literally how I do it. Just planning it all out and being very committed to the schedule that I set for myself. And that wouldn't work for everybody. Doesn't mean you couldn't be a writer,
I want to say thank you so much
Thank
to
you.
you. I loved the book as I read it. I just loved knowing the author, and I loved the story. And it's such a treat for us to hear about your journey to making this dream real, a real published book, one of many, but just the journey for me of hearing how you had this dream and this idea decades ago, and something that stayed in your mind and your heart you really pursued until here we are, and we have this privilege to hear a little bit of the book and hear some of your story.
Thank you.
So thank you so much. Erin is going to sign books.
Yeah.
Perhaps you'll sign one for Asher. That would be really nice. Put it on my tab. I will buy him the book. I think he should have this book. So Erin will be back there to answer more questions and to sign books. And we have wine and cheese. You're welcome to stay and schmooze.